You can go ahead, Sanket.
All right. Yep. So, a very good day to all of you. I welcome you all on behalf of the ISGE. And without any further delay, may I request Derek to please begin with the online presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sanket Pisat, and I am a consultant gynecological endoscopic surgeon practicing in Mumbai, India. First of all, I would like to thank the ISGE and its medical director, Professor Bruno Vanirandal, for giving me this opportunity today to address all of you in this unique webinar. In this webinar today, we will be discussing some of the important points related to the surgical management of Asherman syndrome. I am going to try and concentrate my talk specifically on the surgical aspects, that is, performing the surgery and the safeguards that are required to perform this surgery without causing any complications. Let's first take a look at the video presentation. Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing the surgical procedure for hysteroscopic lysis of severe intrauterine synechia or intrauterine adhesions. Though most of us are already well versed with the concepts of basic diagnostic and operative hysteroscopy, it may be worthwhile revisiting some concepts that have to be kept in mind before we reform a completely deformed uterine cavity that occurs in the case of severe intrauterine synechia. When you start surgery for severe intrauterine synechia, the surgeon has three specific reference points available with him or her. The first point is the internal os, and the other 2 points are the right and left tubal ostia. We all know that the uterus is a triangular cavity joining these 3 points, and when these 3 points are clearly seen, the uterine cavity can be reconstructed based on this knowledge of anatomy and the knowledge of having performed a good number of diagnostic hysteroscopies. We are also aware that the normal fundus is arcuate rather than flat in shape. In case of severe intrauterine synechia, other than presenting as bands in the center of the cavity, these synechia are usually also seen as an indrawing of the fundus and also an indrawing of both the lateral walls of the uterus, kind of a similar picture as would be seen in a severe T-shaped uterus. The end point of this surgery, therefore, would be to try and visualize both the uterine ostia, both the tubal ostia, in one single view from the level of the internal os to make sure that both the side walls have been adequately cut, and to make sure that there is one single straight line that extends between the 2 tubal ostia at the fundus to ensure that a flat fundus has been achieved, thereby recreating the triangular uterine cavity. We will be looking at 2 separate cases. This first case is a 30-year-old nulliparous lady who has had surgical termination of pregnancy by suction evacuation done twice before, and her chief complaints were hypomenorrhea. This is the ultrasound image that shows a thin endometrial lining and an irregularity of the endometrium both at the fundus and in the mid segment of the uterus. For this surgery, we are using a 2.9 mm telescope with a Karl Storz Betocchi type of sheath, and the procedure is being performed under general anesthesia. We may also perform this procedure as an office procedure, although in case of extreme synechia, we may not be able to do a complete job. Yes, with the 1.9 mm telescope and its assembly, one may be able to perform an office hysteroscopy even in the most difficult settings. So as the telescope enters, one can see that a tunnel-like cavity is seen, almost as if the internal os was still to be breached. However, as the telescope is moved back and forth, it can be seen that we have already gone past the level of the internal os. The second suspicion that comes to mind is that of a false passage. However, we are able to make out that there is endometrium seen lining this cavity that has been created. Therefore, the possibility of a false passage is ruled out. Thirdly, because no prior dilatation has been done and we have entered directly under vision without prior dilatation, the possibility of the telescope having walked into a false passage is very, very remote. Therefore, this is the entire cavity as we can see it, and we can only assume that the mark at the top of the cavity is where the fundus lies, because as of now neither the fundus can be demarcated clearly, and of course both the ostia cannot be seen. So this is the cervical canal. Again, we are entering into the uterine cavity slowly. This is still the cervix. The red blood clot is at the level of the internal os approximately, and now we are entering beyond that blood clot to go into the uterine cavity. As the telescope moves into the uterine cavity and the view clears up, we will be able to see better. A hysteroscopic scissor is being used at this stage just to dislodge the blood clots and move inside with more clarity. Now, as we go inside, this end of the cavity is what we would assume to be the fundus, and we will have to start the surgery. Because no definite landmarks are seen, we will try to remain in the center of the cavity and perform the adhesiolysis. So one side of the uterine wall is now being cut, staying equidistant between the anterior and posterior walls. Again, because no ostium is seen, we are not sure of how deep we are supposed to cut. The only marker that is available to us at this stage is the fundus, or the area which we assume to be the fundus at this stage. So we are using that area as a marker, and we are gradually cutting, staying in between the anterior and posterior walls. The scissor is gently opened up to allow more saline under pressure to gush in, and this saline which gushes inside opens up the uterine cavity and shows us spaces which were not earlier visible to us. This also decreases the chances of going into the wrong plane. As this saline goes and escapes into the between the fibers, we are slowly able to see that a small area is coming up on the right side of the screen, which might just be the tubal ostium. So we continue to cut, again keeping the superior most position of the scissors as the fundus which we had marked out earlier. So again, with the fundus being marked out, we are again going laterally and cutting on the lateral side slowly and steadily to try and form a cavity as much as possible. This is again similar to the lateral metroplasty that we perform, in which the fixed blade of the scissor is inserted into the uterus and the moving blade cuts over it so as to make small gentle cuts and open up the cavity bit by bit. So as we are cutting more and more, we find that the cavity starts getting formed, and a small area is now visualized on the right side, which is probably the location of the patient's left tubal ostium. These synechia overlying this part are again cut, and we deepen the incision a little further. Again, remember that because the ostia are not seen, we are trying to recreate the triangle purely based on what we had seen earlier. There, what we can see now is the definitive position of the left tubal ostium. With this information in mind, there is much more that can be done, because now I am sure of one of the 2 points, which is the left tubal ostium, and at the same area or at the same level I can be sure that there will be the fundus. So among the 3 points that we discussed earlier, I now know the location of the internal os and I know the location of the left tubal ostium. With these 2 locations now known, I am able to deepen my cuts from the internal os to the left tubal ostium slowly and steadily, so that I am trying to form a straight line between the internal os and the tubal ostium. This line itself is going to be my guide to tell me how deep I am supposed to go, so that I do not end up perforating the uterus. with the tubal ostium clearly demarcated, I am going to deepen one of the walls of the uterine cavity to bring this ostium in line with the internal os, so that I am able to see that ostium from the internal os in one straight line at the level of the internal os itself. The other marker that is coming up is, slowly we can see here, there are some blood vessels which are coming up. This is another indicator that the fibrous part of the synechiae is now being cut off, and we are getting closer and closer to muscular fibers. So that is sufficient correction for now on one side. And now if you compare this side with the other side, you can see how completely the obliteration is seen. But now for us, half of the uterine cavity has already been demarcated. Using the picture of that half of the uterine cavity, I am now trying to recreate the other half. So gradually I am cutting the fundus of the uterus, and I am trying to level the fundus with the level of the incision that I made earlier. So we continue with our incision on the fundus, and now we can see that the picture is much better than what it was before. All that the surgeon has to do now is to try and level the fundus by recreating a line that was joining the two ostial openings. So gradually these cuts have been made, and now let us proceed to the other side, which is the patient's right uterine wall. As we saw on the left side, similar procedure is done on the right side, making small nicks into the uterine wall in an attempt to make the uterine wall leveled and to cut off the excess bridge of tissue which is separating the anterior and posterior walls over the lateral wall. As these cuts are successively deepened, the fibrous tissue starts giving way to more and more muscular tissue until such a point is reached where we are now able to see the openings of the blood vessels, which are seen now behind the scissors. So this is like on the other side, this is an indicator that a significant depth has been reached. As you continue to watch the rest of the surgery, let us discuss that the choice of instrument here is always the hysteroscopic scissors, because fine controlled cuts can be taken compared to the sudden energy bursts that would be required in a resectoscope, and the cavity can be formed in any specific way that is desired to the surgeon. The other advantage is the somewhat tactile feedback that the scissor offers to the surgeon, and the visualization of vessels and tissue color, which gives you some markers guiding you towards completing the surgery. Perforation is not a major problem as it would be with a resectoscope, because even if you would perforate the uterus, a small 2 mm rent is created which can easily be sutured. More so, the current in case of a resectoscope would escape beyond the level of the uterus and possibly damage the bowel and other structures above the uterus. But in case of a hysteroscopic scissor, this cannot happen, and the damage will be restricted to the uterus only. With the right and left uterine wall having been cut, the fundal trimming is now what remains to reform the cavity back to its original shape. It may be noted that small gentle cuts are made on the fundus rather than bold large cuts in an attempt to avoid perforation. The other important thing to remember is that the fundus is gradually trimmed from one side to the other rather than deepening completely at one particular site. This again decreases the possibility of an inadvertent perforation. So gradually snips are made from the right side to the left side and back until a sufficient depth of the fundus has been reached. It is always better to undercorrect a little bit rather than do an overcorrection and avoid a perforation. As we saw on the lateral walls, here also the appearance of blood vessels gives us some idea that the muscular part of the fundus has been reached. A few more things that need to be remembered at this stage is that one must have a good distension apparatus like a good Hysteromat or even a Med-X pressure bag in order to distend the uterus optimally. The key to doing this surgery safely is that a good distension of the uterus pulls the two walls of the uterus apart, and making gentle nicks with the scissors does the job of separating the uterine cavity. Also, a good sharp hysteroscopic scissors is vital. Here we are using an Indian brand of hysteroscopic scissors which does the job quite well and is able to give fine cuts to trim the cavity into the shape that we desire to achieve. Now one can appreciate that from the level of the internal os, one ostium is seen, the other ostium is seen, and one can also see the blood vessels pulsating on both lateral walls and at the fundus. We do try to assess the vascularity by reducing the distension pressure just a little bit, and after reduction of the distension pressure, some blood vessels are seen to open up, which is a good sign and which also suggests that probably the estrogen therapy that is given post-operatively will actually be able to reach up till here and cause endometrial growth in the parts that we have cleared up. So this is the final picture. Both the ostia are seen from the internal os, and that is the end of the surgery. We will be now looking at case number 2. This case has a similar clinical picture and ultrasound findings as compared to the previous case. We are going through the cervical canal at the level of the internal os and trying to find exactly where the internal os is before we can proceed with the rest of the surgery. Now if we take a close look, we can see that we have gone a little beyond the internal os, and when the telescope is moved forward and backwards, the cervix now gives way to the internal os, and here you can see that the external outer point is the internal os, but also seen in this picture is a grey area at the isthmus. This grey area is probably the area where the adhesions are a little less dense, and this area is also halfway between the anterior and posterior walls of the uterus, and therefore this is the area that we are going to use to begin our dissection. So a scissor is gently brought inside and thrust into this area in order to open it up. As we saw in the first case, gentle opening of the scissors into the cavity allows for the saline to gush inside and opens up the plane of dissection for us, which would have otherwise been a wrong plane of dissection had we tried to cut in forcibly. Now the telescope moves inside after lysing those adhesions at the internal os, and once the telescope moves inside, the right ostium is now clearly visible. So we now know where the internal os is, and we know where the right ostium is. So as we have discussed before, it is now possible to recreate the cavity to the best possible extent. So again we are going inside with the telescope. That is definitely the right tubal ostium, which is seen quite clearly, and as the telescope looks on the other side, we can see that the other half of the uterine cavity is almost entirely obliterated. So again we mark the internal os and we start from a point that is just beyond the internal os. Again the closed scissors is thrust inside and gentle cuts are made, remaining midway between the anterior wall and the posterior wall. Here the lateral wall is trimmed a little bit again, and though we do not have any exact marker of how deep we are supposed to go, we do know the mental picture of having seen the ostium on the other side, and therefore considering that this the ostium on this side is going to be more or less a mirror image of that ostium, we can proceed a little bit deeper and try to find the left tubal ostium. Now as the uterus, as the fibers get a little more rare in consistency and the hysteroscopic scissors opens up these fibers, a small area is starting to be seen at the center of the screen, which is probably the patient's left tubal ostium. As after these fibers are cut, we can now clearly see that the left tubal ostium has come into view, and there the left tubal ostium is now visible beyond the synechiae. Now what needs to be done is again correcting the cavity between the two. Let's discuss a couple of points before we move forward. The first point of debate is whether concomitant laparoscopy is useful in this case. That's a yes and no answer. No, because a laparoscope will not help to prevent a perforation. Of course, it will diagnose a perforation once it has occurred. However, if we look at it from the other point of view, concomitant laparoscopy is useful because in a pelvis with dense adhesions, it may be wiser to do a slight undercorrection than risk a perforation that might be difficult to suture. Typical cases are those of pelvic tuberculosis with dense bowel adhesions to the uterine fundus, where you would not like to take a chance during the surgery and the patient has not been counseled for a laparoscopy. Again, consent, however, informed consent for an SOS laparoscopy is a must in case a perforation does occur. What we are now trying to do differently from the first case is to excise rather than incise the fibrous tissue. The concept behind this being that the fibrous tissue is existing within the uterine cavity as a band rather than a single point, and merely incising this band will leave two edges of the band attached to both sides of the uterine cavity, that is to the anterior wall and to the posterior wall. Instead of simply incising this, if an effort could be made to excise this band by cutting both close to the anterior wall and to the posterior wall and excising a wedge of tissue as much as possible, we could probably give the patient a better chance at fertility. So that is what is being done. A wedge of tissue is attempted to be excised by cutting closer to the anterior wall and then to the posterior wall so as to take out a chunk of tissue between the anterior wall and posterior wall. So again, the scissor is gently moved, and as the scissor goes deeper and deeper and this wedge like tissue is removed, we see that the white fibrous portion will start giving way to a more vascular part of the uterus, and the difference between the vascular part and the fibrous part can be made both by the feel of the tactile sensation which the surgeon has, as well as the color of the tissue. So this is again a small wedge of tissue being excised from the anterior wall, and it can be moved away now after excising. Once this tissue has been excised, you can see now that the color of the wall is seemingly a little bit different. More blood vessels have started coming up. More pinkish tissue has started becoming visible, which means that we are moving closer to the normal uterine musculature as compared to the scarred tissue that we were cutting earlier, which is a very good sign. So the scissor tries to make deeper and deeper movements to take off chunks of tissue or chunks of fibrous tissue as much as possible, rather than simply incising the fibrous tissue in the midline and leaving a foreign body behind, which would be rather detrimental for fertility. So this again is a small block of tissue which is being excised. Of course, this may not be possible in all cases, but should be attempted whenever there is a possibility of doing it, because the fertility prognosis is definitely better in these cases after this excision has been done. The other point of debate or of questioning is whether adhesion prevention measures are regularly used. We are regularly using a pediatric Foley's catheter number 8 or 10. Other option is a Cook's intrauterine balloon, but that is not available, and we always back it up with estradiol valerate plus medroxyprogesterone for 3 cycles. And it is not available in India, but the hyaluronic acid gel is seemingly a good choice. Always second look hysteroscopy is performed after 3 months, at least in those patients who give consent for it, because some adhesions definitely remain and those can be cut later. What about the prognosis for future menses? That is quite good. Patients do get their periods back, but as far as fertility is concerned, the prognosis is guarded. First trimester abortions are common, probably due to poor implantation, and those patients who do make it to later pregnancy have IUGR, severe IUGR, and sometimes even a morbidly adherent placenta. So that's the last of the fundal trimming which is being done. Small chunks of tissue as much as possible are being excised. You can see that we've reached up till the level of the blood vessels, and that is almost the end point of the surgery. Let's now take one last look at what the uterus looks like. So as we see, we are going in again through the cervix. That is the ostium on one side. That is the ostium on the other side, and you can see that we've recreated a fairly good cavity. We will now have a review of literature to discuss some of the important points that have not been covered in the presentation so far. First, let's take a look at what the reviews of literature says about the recent surgical techniques. This first study that we are going to discuss is a study published by Salazar et al. In the Current Opinion in Obstetrics and Gynecology in 2017. They said that office hysteroscopy can be offered in the majority of patients with Asherman syndrome and with 89% of cases using preoperative NSAIDs alone for analgesia. That means inpatient admission for the purpose of hysteroscopic synecholysis is not really required, and 89% of patients can be tackled as an office procedure alone. Routine pre-treatment with prostaglandins or misoprostol is not recommended for these patients, and one can easily manage without pre-treatment by prostaglandins. Coming to the controversial role of estrogens, they said that estrogen may produce beneficial effects in patients with intrauterine adhesions undergoing adhesiolysis, with improvement in the menstrual flow in 64 to 100% of patients. The only controversy that does remain in this regard is whether additional supplementation of estrogen is going to help a patient who does have normal levels of estrogen in the body. Would that additive estrogen add to a beneficial effect on the uterus is something that is still under study. They found that no method using physical barriers like the pediatric Foley's catheter has been shown to offer any statistically significant reduction of adhesions in the future, and therefore they recommended that any physical barriers like a Foley's catheter or an IUCD not be placed in situ. In this second study that we will be looking at, which was published by Jasper and colleagues, which is the Belgian Consensus on Adhesion Prevention in Hysteroscopy and Laparoscopy, and was published in Gynecological Surgery in 2015 with Bruno van Erendaal, states that for intrauterine adhesions, we suggest to minimize unipolar and bipolar instrumentation wherever possible. So the use of hysteroscopic scissors as a cold source is preferred to the use of bipolar or monopolar electrical instrumentation for the sake of prevention of post-operative adhesions. They also advocated the use of estrogens for 10 days post-operatively to reduce adhesion formation. They also said that installation of a hyalurobarrier gel may have a beneficial effect in cases after hysteroscopic myomectomy or hysteroscopic adhesiolysis. Let's now look at the obstetric outcome after successful correction of Asherman syndrome, which is a very important point to take into consideration when patients are being counseled before or after surgery. So in this first paper that we are looking at, which was published by Guo and colleagues in the journal Best Practice and Research Clinical Obstetrics and Gynecology in 2019, they had a pooled study of 54 different studies over 4,640 women. All of these studies were of varying quality, but they did find that the pooled rate of pregnancy was 50.7% in 53 studies, that the rate of early pregnancy loss was 17.7% in 31 studies, the rate of ectopic pregnancy was 4.2% in 9 studies, mid-trimester loss, which is a significant point, was 11.5% in 7 studies, cervical incompetence was 12.5% in 2 studies, and placenta accreta syndrome was 10.1% in over 23 studies. So these points are very significant when we do have patients coming to us who would like to know what kind of obstetric outcome they may expect once they have been diagnosed with Asherman syndrome. The study also noted that the pregnancy rate in women with severe adhesions was significantly lower than that in women with mild adhesions, with a p-value of 0.021, which is highly significant and which specifically means that these patients should be adequately counseled about the risk and the possibilities of conception even if they undergo an IVF pregnancy. Looking at some of the newer treatment avenues that are being explored nowadays, particularly the role of stem cell therapy in cases of Asherman syndrome, this particular study by Santa Maria and colleagues published in Human Reproduction in 2016 claimed that in the first 3 months, autologous cell therapy using bone marrow derived stem cells in conjunction with hormone replacement therapy was useful. It increased the volume and the duration of menses as well as the thickness and the angiogenesis processes of the endometrium while decreasing intrauterine adhesion scores. So maybe there is some hope in the long run for these patients with stem cell therapy. That concludes my presentation in this webinar. I thank all of you viewers for listening to me patiently and once again thank the ISG for this wonderful opportunity. A very good day to all of you.
Sanket, can you address the few questions? The one from Eddie about the IUD insertion to prevent recurrent adhesions?
Yes, sir. Let me just take a look. What about IUD insertion to prevent the recurrence of adhesions? So normally we are not inserting the IUDs to prevent adhesion recurrence simply because most of the IUDs do have copper on them and the copper itself causes more adhesion formation. But other than that, the Lippes loop, which were available previously, had a much larger surface area and they did have some separation of the walls. But just the copper T remaining inside doesn't really separate the walls enough to provide for any significant reduction of adhesion.
And the one from Padnawar?
Yeah, are there any hysteroscopic markers or indicators for endometrial epithelialization post-syneculisis? So not really. What we do is we screen these patients by a 2D or 3D ultrasound 3 months after surgery. And if possible, if in some of these cases, the endometrium does seem to grow better than what it was growing before, and the endometrial vascularization seems to improve, but it can only be confirmed by a relook hysteroscopy 3 months later. Other than that, I am not aware.
I believe that there is this evidence from the Netherlands where it depends on the state of the endometrium when you do the procedure, and it's depending on the regrowth of the endometrium for sure. Yes, there's another question from Garzon.
Let me scroll down. What is your regular management of this patient after surgery? So most of the times we are still, though the literature does say that we do not have, the placement of a physical barrier like an intrauterine Foley's catheter does not help. In some of our, or in most of our patients, we have found that it does help, which is actually contradictory to the published evidence, but we are trying to get more and more cases. So in most of these patients, we would put in an intrauterine Foley's catheter. This is a pediatric Foley's catheter number 8. And we've now started experimenting with the Cook's intrauterine catheter, which is a heart-shaped balloon. And it keeps the walls of the uterine cavity apart a little better than the intrauterine Foley's catheter. And then these patients are subjected to post-operative estrogen therapy, which is again a matter of debate because, like we said in the webinar, these patients already have estrogen in them, and whether giving more estrogen is going to be beneficial is something that we are not aware. But as of now, we are giving these patients estradiol valerate for about 2 months along with intermittent medroxyprogesterone acetate, and then doing a relook hysteroscopy 3 months later.
There is another question about, there are a few questions about the recurrence of, the relook hysteroscopy. When do you do it, and what do you do during them?
Yes, so for usually we found that at least it would be difficult to give a number, but at least 30 to 40% of these patients do have adhesions on relook hysteroscopy. The good thing is that these adhesions are most of the times less dense, and once these adhesions have been cut, they usually do not seem to reform on post-operative ultrasound examinations, and so patients usually do better.
And when do you do it?
3 months after the primary
3
surgery.
months? Well, we used to do it 2 months, but depending,
Okay.
and then if there's a problem and the patient do not get pregnant, you can rebook them 6 months later. But mostly we didn't find any adhesions at that time. The question is an earlier relook hysteroscopy recommended? But do you,
It would be difficult to say, but usually the adhesions do form and they get epithelialized and they get harder over a period of time. So I don't know if an earlier hysteroscopy would really benefit, but no real data on that, nothing to, no real figures to talk about it.
no, because of course the uterus is a virtual cavity, and so when it falls down, you get the adhesion formation takes about 5 to 7 days. But I would not. Well, then of course by reopening the uterus, you would break them down anyway. So I'm not sure that that an earlier is interesting. I think we'll just have to wait for 2 months, and then you can lyse them. And maybe it's a good idea, like you said, to take as much of the adhesion out as possible, not just the center, but take that and so on. Then there is another, but I think you covered that, but maybe you can repeat it. It's about of the obstetric implications and the risk of placenta accreta and increta. You covered that, but maybe you can
Yes.
just re-answer that.
Yes, so most of these patients, particularly patients who have higher degrees of intrauterine synechiae, most of these patients do not have a very good obstetric outcome. If we're able to correct the cavity anatomically, we are able to get these patients pregnant by IVF, but a significant number of these patients will have early trimester losses. Some of them go on to have mid trimester losses, and those that progress to later in the pregnancy, there is a definitely increased incidence of placenta accreta. It's probably because the basal layer of endometrium has gone and the placenta burrows right in. So the obstetric outcome is definitely guarded in these patients. Yes.
So I see you got a lot of compliments. There is another question here. I'll just mark it for you. To get the pregnancy after surgery, how long does the patient have to wait before trying to get pregnant?
Okay, somehow I cannot hear. I can read the question. How long does the patient has to wait before trying to get pregnant after surgery? So, like we said before, there is a significant possibility of the adhesions forming again, no matter how good a surgery you have done. So, it would be a good idea to wait for at least 3 months and take a second look after 3 months. Some adhesions will reform, clear up those adhesions, and then the patient can try for a pregnancy. And I think that would be the best time. So yes, a 3 month waiting period is at least what would be recommended.
Is there any questions left there? I think there's a lot of compliments, Sanket. So, and especially about your videos, because I was impressed with the videos, and
Thank you.
I've done a few myself, so there's no real. But it was a great presentation. So I think you can conclude the webinar, and we'll thank the people that stayed with us until now.
So thank you so much. Thank you everyone who attended, and thank you, Professor Bruno. Thank you to the ISGE who gave me this opportunity to present here. And I surely hope that this has been helpful to you. I believe the recording will be there on the website for those who need to see it later. And thank you so much for listening.
Yes, the videos also, the what we do with these webinars to answer SIP is, Yasmin, is that everything is recorded and the webmaster puts it on the IHG.org for everybody to see it. And so that is what you can do. And from Monday, they will be on the website, and or Monday, Tuesday, and you can then revisit everything. And then, of course, the sound will be good for people that sorry for them, don't have that good an internet connection, which is always the problem with these. Right? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sanket, for all the efforts, and apologizing for what happened last time, but this time I think everything went very, very well. So,
Thank you.
Okay, Dirk, I think you can now close the webinar. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dirk.
Okay, no problem. You're welcome. I close now.